So welcome everybody to HR Championing Change, Building Successful Learning and Development Strategies. This is the latest installment in a series of EF Corporate Solutions webinars. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome, welcome. This webinar is 45 minutes long. It's about a half hour of time learning from Stefano, and then another 15 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. If you have any questions or comments in the meantime, please do indeed feel free to add them to the comments section below. Perhaps by this time, many of us are used to Zoom, so you know exactly where that is. And then during the Q&A time, we'll use the Q&A box as well. But let's start off with some introductions. My name is Josh Elboim. I'm the country manager for EF Corporate Solutions here in the United States, and I'm responsible for EF Corporate Solutions relationships with US companies worldwide. After a 15-year career in global investment banks in London, I joined EF about 2 years ago in our North American headquarters in Boston, because I'm really very passionate about many of the topics that we'll speak about today, including languages and the world quotient of global organizations and their employees. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Stefano Vetralla, the former Senior Vice President of Global HR for KEMET Electronics, which is one of the world's largest manufacturers of capacitors. They're the small components that go on PC boards in the guts of a computer. So, buongiorno Stefano, come vai?
Buongiorno, molto bene, and thank you for having me, Josh.
Why don't you introduce yourself, Stefano, and let us know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, again, thank you for having me. We collaborated very well, and it's also kind of friendship, so it's always nice to have a conversation among friends, and I feel like in friendship with all the participants today. Well, as you said, I'm Stefano Vetralla. I'm from Italy, from a beautiful city in the north, Milano. Even if I've been living here in the States, in the beautiful Florida, Miami, for 6 years, exactly when I moved here to take over the responsibility for the global HR for KEMET. I have almost 30 years experience in HR. Let's say first 15 years in IT companies, and the second part, as you said, the KEMET and the manufacturing company. I had the privilege to do what I really love to do, and that's the biggest satisfaction. I really love HR.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Stefano. That's exciting, and we are very lucky to have you with us today to share some of that experience of your 30 years. And we'll be talking about, indeed, how HR can build successful learning and development strategies. Shall we begin?
Yep, we'll try.
Super. So just one thing to start. Here are the two of us. You can now see us as our back.
Beautiful.
A bit of a plug here about EF before we kick off. As you can see here, EF is very proud to be the executive education partner of over 2,500 global organizations and their 2 million corporate learners over the years. We deliver market-leading language and leadership programs to corporations, governments, and NGOs to help increase efficiency through language and cultural proficiency. And if you haven't seen our mission, maybe it's something that would be close to your heart as well. It's to open the world through education and provide life-changing education to global. Super. So, Stefano, just to open things up a little bit and to kick off the conversation, which we like to say is just a conversation among friends and professionals. And if we had a fire pit and had a fire chat, then indeed we could sit around that. But in the virtual environment, we'll kick off here. Riding the wave of change. I know you come to us from Miami, and so we're not necessarily talking about surfing all the time, although that would make us jealous. But seriously, HR and learning and development have been at the corporate front lines during the pandemic, very much the heroes in your third point here. Where are we now? Bring us up to today.
Well, to be very honest, I think that we all are still trying to understand what happened. And I'm referring to the pandemic, of course. We're still in the midst of the pandemic with some progress, but we are still trying to understand which are the consequences and what's next. So I I have the feeling that there are more questions now than answers, despite a lot of people are providing answer. I don't think we are still at the right time where a consolidated understanding. My personal experience, for example, last year was very tough. I think I'm not the only one experiencing this kind of. We were unprepared, so we felt very vulnerable, fragile, and it was tough. Even if also this isolation. I used to travel a lot. I used to travel 60-70% of my time. And this lockdown was really tough. It was time for deep reflection. And as you said, to be isolated in Miami is probably not the worst thing, but still as professional, we should understand the experience that we are facing. Professionally, I think at KEMET we did a good job. We had to protect our people, so priority was absolutely to be sure that our people were safe. But in the meantime, to keep up with the operations with more than 20 plants all over the world. I was really impressed by the support that HR and local management provided to our people. And for us was brand new to work from home. I mean, we were not, as a manufacturing company, used to work from home. We were not totally unprepared, but was a big change.
Yeah.
So overall, I think it's a good opportunity because from challenges come always good opportunity to position HR as a transformative contributor and player.
Super. I love that growth mindset of thinking about the unknown in some way. Why don't we talk about that a little bit? And for everybody there who's joining us today, this is really as much a question for Stefano as it is for you at the end of the day. So we'd love to have your input as to what you believe to be the mission of L&D in 2021. Obviously, we're a few months into it, so we know where we're going. But, Stefano, we're coming out of this massive change. The entire idea of work has changed. HR and L&D have had a big voice in the past year. What's next? What do you see as the key things for this year?
Well, a mission is clearly important because it helps us to be relevant. We want to sit at the table where decisions are taken, discussions and conversations are important for the future of our companies. And if we identify the right mission, we are in the right spot. Actually, despite all the tragedy with the coronavirus happened, I don't think the coronavirus and the pandemic is the key factor. The key factor is the transformation into a digital economy. That's really the change factor. That not only for the most advanced and coolest company like Amazon or B&B or Uber or Google, but the digital transformation is coming, is in progress. So the pandemic has accelerated this change.
Yeah,
basically.
Super segue as we get a little bit into, I guess, the deeper approach in today's discussion, which is about these 5 pillars that you talk about, right? Digitalization, you just mentioned one of them.
Yeah.
So I love how you break this down into 5 key pillars here. And let's just be quick because I know that you're going to be developing these a little bit into some of your other slides. But if you had looked at this 2 years ago, what would this have looked like? And which 2 of these do you think lead us forward? You just mentioned digitalization. Is that one of them?
Well, definitely yes. We need to reorienting and reskilling workforce and embracing the digital transformation. I would say that as part of the mission, also working out a new leadership definition is equally important, but is a result of the focus on these 3-5. There can be many, so more or less, but 3-5 key aspects.
Super. Okay. Why don't we take a dive into some of these pillars here? The first one, reorienting and reskilling the workforce. We've discussed the second point on this slide before, the culture of learning comes from both the organization and the individual, but who has the vision for what that should be? In a world where AI and robotics and macro shifts in
Yeah.
the economy are changing everything, who leads that?
Well, in each company, we have to play a significant role. There are plenty of studies showing that jobs will be transformed, changed, some eliminated, some created, and so continuous change towards the implementation of the digital skills in particular, it's important. So we should ask, as HR, we should take the lead and should ask what type of how current jobs in my company will be affected, will be impacted by the digital transformation. We need to make an accurate analysis by job family and to understand where and what exactly, and introduce a gradual transformation. Most importantly is to create a culture of learning, but this time is extremely concrete because it's not just a matter of new skills or technicality, it's a matter of mental approach, is a mindset. Is that nowadays, the more you know, the more you need to learn. So it's not the opposite. So that's also where HR can play a strategic role.
Super. Okay, well, let's move on to the next one, the digital transformation that you mentioned beforehand. I can't tell you how many different discussions I've had in the past year with peers of yours in the market who said, you know, the pandemic forced a 2-year digitalization strategy into a 2-month strategy. And then, oh my God, it's a 2-week execution plan. Let's get going. Some parts of the world were already on this path and may have had a bit of a head start, multi-year head start, and some were really forced into it. Can you give me 2 to 3 examples, Stefano, as to how your organization approached digitalization, where it was within that path?
Yeah, I have 2 examples and 2 recommendations. The first recommendation is to start with small steps, small things that can help the rest of the organization to understand what is the value. And the second is to focus on, do not focus on technology first, but focus on re-engineering the HR processes. Because the real question is what I can differently do because of the possibilities offered by the technologies. And having said that is more clear, probably what I'm trying to say. The first example is the performance appraisal. I work for different companies. All the times in all the companies, performance appraisal was criticized. It's not a good system, it's a waste of time, it's not useful. So at KEMET, we wanted to do something slightly different. We wanted to put something more in connection, connecting more manager and employees, having more frequent sections, having a focus more on development other than assessment. So we decided to go with an app. It's something nowadays very simple. So we work with a small software house. The costs were not impossible. And we developed this app, a very agile and simple tool to put in contact manager and employees, almost 3,000 people. And we got very good results and appreciation. Another example is the virtual reality. It's possible now to apply the virtual reality to training solution. So we developed in agreement, in collaboration with the University of Clemson, this training for the technicians, maintenance technicians. Excuse me. So instead of sending over to China and Mexico our technicians to support the local production, we made this virtual training. So again, small things, but incremental. And I suggest that we start to work much more closely with IT departments. IT is changing too. They are focusing on infrastructure and systems, but infrastructure and system without people cannot work. So maybe some days we will envision this integration between HR and IT, because it's really the same strategic direction. So
Critical. Super. So performance appraisals went online. You obviously get shop floor type of training through VR. How about the switch from face to face into virtual? I know that we did an EF language program together. What was that like in terms of the transformation of language learning from what you may have had in the past to then what you had with EF online?
well, it's important the communication. It's important the communication. Before you communicate, you need to make sure that you have a common code. So it was a very interesting integration tool. In particular, after as KEMET, we went through several acquisitions. The last acquisition was with a Japanese company.
Mm-hmm.
So American company and Japanese company, as you know, different type of cultures. And we found because it's useful to be simple sometimes. You don't need to do big things. You can start with very simple things like an English course. We started with HR with more than 100 people. And I saw strong commitment. So our confidence, self-confidence in our communication grow, and other managers within the organization started to ask the same for their function. So step by step, small but consistent.
It's an interesting approach to obviously the title of today's webinar, which is HR Championing Change, right? Because indeed, you put much of that influence in the hands of your team, HR and L&D, kind of germinating the idea of language and the commonality of language, and bringing a company that had been acquisitive and also acquired closer together through language. And it's very interesting how you took the lead. Fantastic example. Thank you very much for that. Just moving on to the next slide here, building the cultural intelligence. I absolutely love this slide. And I mentioned that beforehand. I really do love the idea of cultural quotient, as you say, or in EF terms, we call it world quotient, right? Which really transcends the idea of IQ and EQ and gets to the heart of cultural fluency. Call it what you will. Ultimately, we work in international companies in multiple languages with people from all around the world. We need to find that level of cultural intelligence. So you had the language program with EF. What did that mean for integrating cultural intelligence into your HR and L&D strategies for the organization?
Well, for me, was a great lesson since when I joined KEMET in particular, because 95% of our people is based outside the US. Because in my team, more than 100 people in HR were distributed in 22 countries. So you can imagine multiple languages, result of several acquisitions, 14,000 people. So diversity for me was just a concept, but then I realized that it's much more. It's definitely much more. And despite the globalization, we still see deep differences. It's about the way we communicate. It's about the way we evaluate. We build trust. It's about everything. So it's a particular skill set that as a manager and as a HR in particular, but as a manager and as a leadership, we have to develop. What is the easiest thing is to start to speak the same language, a language that can help you to open yourself, explain yourself, and understand the others.
I guess much of that comes from shifting gears a little bit from spending a lot of money in the budget for translation services for everything that goes across the organization into teaching everybody a life skill and a professional skill of actually being able to communicate. And inherent within that is cultural. Is it a challenge directing that around the world from the US? Or indeed, did you have to bring in some of those leaders from different parts of the world to give their definition of what cultural fluency means to them?
Well, it's a definition in progress because cultures evolve, and also as a leader, as a HR, we need to understand which are the fundamentals. But Back for a second on the language. When we implemented, and this is something that I always struggle with in the organization, fight for that. I wanted to have systems with one language. And then you say information system for HR can allow you to have multiple languages. But we always insisted on the fact that if you want to be part of a global organization, even if it's a basic entry-level knowledge, you have to speak the same language. And so this is another example.
Critical. Thank you so much for that, Stefano. As I said, it's something I think oftentimes within L&D and HR is slightly outside of the core strategy. Upskilling, management skills, executive leadership, other things tend to be the things that are the primary focus, but really language and cultural understanding are the grease in the wheels to all of these different initiatives. So thank you for bringing that up. Just jumping into the next one, learning on demand. To me, it's this combination of where, when, and how I learn. Certainly in the past year, in the shift of work from home, this has highlighted the where and the when, because the where is we're at home and the when is it can kind of be at any time as you're facing this new work-life balance. Do you have any takeaways from these on-demand programs that you've put in place in your career, perhaps such as the one even with EF, or anything else that you've worked with that is at the snap of the fingers where and when you want it?
Yeah, because if learning and continuous learning gets a priority, and the distance learning technologies are much more advanced and at some costs are acceptable, then the system we need to implement always accessible platform of system anytime. It's a responsibility of each employee to be to commit him or himself for a continuous learning and to have the possibility to access to the classes, training, or courses they want anytime. This is a very interesting experience. I would like to mention at KEMET with the 200 managers, top management and middle management. So for 200 people, we made an analysis of the needs, and then one by one, we work out an individual development plan, and we offer the support from our training and development to identify the courses and training that they needed. And we gave them access for 1 year to a learning platform. So you can access anytime from anywhere and be responsible for accountable for your continuous development.
Okay, great. Just curiosity there. This is very much about, as you mentioned, personalized learning paths, and that is up to the self-motivation. I think you tapped on a little bit before, this cultural of learning. How do you really engender that in the organization? If you're asking people to drive much of that themselves and then utilize that on demand, how do you create that environment, that culture?
Well, there are three aspects. First of all is culture. It's a value. So from top down, this is considered something appreciated by the organization and rewarded. It's another important aspect. And yeah, I would say rewarding and from the top, from the CEO to the top of the organization. This is seen as a must, should be seen as a must.
Perfect. Great. Let's jump to the next one. The trainer is your professional coach. Now, the word coaching and the industry of coaching and the role of coaching has evolved over the years, certainly. What was once an external consultant and perhaps only reserved for top executives is now potentially your direct line manager or anywhere throughout the pyramid of seniority. And you yourself, Stefano, are a coach. Where do you think coaching plays a role in the organization today?
This answer also to your question about how can we make this more effective through our organization. Also, training is changing. If our employees, our people are facing this type of changes, they need support. So we need to move from one-to-many to one-to-one. We need to make sure that each single employee professionally supporting this career transition, career change, career evolution, job skills, transformation and development. And I've talked with several HR directors and some HR VP, and they are saying that the need for a special assistance, special support is even higher now, since the remote working and the lack of interactions with colleagues and with your manager. So in particular on a couple of areas, on the emotional intelligence and transformation and management. It's another opportunity for us to be relevant, because we all need a trusted advisor, an independent advisor that can help me to build my steps career. And I think this is an opportunity for not only for trainers and for L&D, but also for HR and for managers to shift to a professional coach, to a coach role.
I think once you become a coach as a manager as well, you become that much better a people manager overall. So yet another great skill to have when you're managing teams and motivating teams. Thank you for that. As we wrap into the final minutes, we've now been talking for the past half hour about these 5 pillars. And I just wanted to summarize this a little bit. We've spoken about reorienting, reskilling the workforce, embracing the digital transformation, developing cultural intelligence, learning on demand, and trainer as your coach. To summarize and to give people a takeaway for what they should remember, what do you think really the 2 points are that they should take away today?
Well, as a takeaway, that is, excuse me, as a thought for me too, it's a HR championing the change, which is the title of our webinar. I was thinking that is about leadership, and you cannot wait anyone else to allow you to be a leader. As a HR, we need to take the leadership, and to be leader now means in particular focus on culture, creating leaders, so people, professional, much better than us, much stronger than us, smarter than us, and continue to learn. So if we want to play, and again, as I said in the beginning, as a conversation, is sharing some reflections, some thoughts. But what I learned is that if you want to be really a protagonist in the change, it's equal to be a leader. And to be a leader is about learning, first of all, keep learning. I grew up with this idea that leaders were the guys with all the answers. It's not anymore like that. It's too complex out there. So you need to be a fast learner and with a, for the lack of a better word, resilient. So very strong, but a fast learner.
Yeah, I love that third point. Leaders are learners, right? And they have to be dynamic, I think, in how they're approaching challenges, both from a business perspective and a people perspective. So understanding a VUCA world and being able to always bring new tools to bear and new approaches to problems is really critical. Thank you so much for that insight, Stefano. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Josh.
I think you and I could sit around this fire for hours and certainly continue to wax on about a lot of your experience and what it means, because again, I think it's been an absolutely critical time for HR and L&D over the past 12 plus months. And there's a real seat there for change and discussion. So what I wanted to do in our final short to 15 minutes or so is certainly open this up to some of our attendees and include some of their questions. And if my technology is going to work with me, okay, we can open some up here. So Stefano, I'm just going to read some of these here for a second.
Only the positive comments, not the negative comments.
Stefano, you're great, you're great, you're great. That's what it said in the first thing. the first three. Here's an interesting one. The balance of translation and teaching people a language is something that we worked on or spoke about beforehand. So in the future, do you think it's necessary to speak and therefore learn different languages when you consider that everything can be translated for you, right? Either it's there on a static document or maybe in an app or something else. What's the balance between them? You know, some people love to learn languages and other people struggle with it. How would you balance translation versus teaching someone a language?
And again, this is just my feeling, experience, reflection. Everybody is free to do whatever, but learning a language is a big challenge, and I like challenges. As you can see from I'm Italian. I speak a bit of French. I'm now speaking in English. It's a acceptable, let's say not perfect business English. You need more than a language when you learn a language. You learn how to be humble, because you cannot express yourself as with the same confidence that you have when you speak in your native language, but this makes you stronger. It helps to understand the way the culture that use that language communicate. It's more than learning a language. So whatever is your role, whatever is your activity, learn as many languages as possible. I know that you speak 5 languages or more than 5 languages probably. And maybe not to that point, but definitely it open your mind. And today we need this more than ever.
Yeah.
So it helps also the personal growth. It's not just effective from a communication standpoint, but it helps your growth as a person.
It's as much speaking the actual
sense?
language as understanding the idea of taking a step closer towards someone who may be different from a different part of the world and helping to bridge that gap. So if everyone is assuming a bit of that responsibility, that's how we close that gap. Interesting. So it's not always necessarily learning English, but it's learning somebody's language, speaking somebody's language, getting closer to them, whether that's English or anything else that may be used in that corporate setting. It's getting a little bit closer. In fact, Yasuko, I think, had mentioned something similar to that, which is, does it always have to be English? If that's your corporate language and it's required and that helps you within your environment, certainly. If it's another language that helps you in the environment, take the language, get closer to people, take that step, right? And then you show goodwill towards them. Great. A little bit more on the business side of things, Stefano. A question here from Carlos. Personalized learning brings a challenge to measurement versus standard structured programs. What's the view on the obsession with KPIs in learning, like return on investment, attendance rates, all the metrics that really drive success?
Let me be a bit provocative here. Forget the standard. Forget the standard. Who cares about the standard? And I want to just provocate, of course, because it's a very good question and it's something we experience every day in our companies, the limitation that someone wants to put into our areas. But by definition, HR has an unlimited horizon, and standard is a bad word in HR, because it's the object of our work, of our business, is the person, and there is nothing less standard than a person. So it's time to be to personalize, because this is a necessity now more than ever.
As a segue to that, if indeed there has been a focus on KPIs and proving that value in some way to the business unit or to the corporate strategy, and your own philosophy around that, has that changed at all in the past year? Do you think the crisis has helped HR and L&D demonstrate its value to the organization? I mean, does that how do you balance that?
Well, if you see what happened last year, so what type of KPIs can help you to manage what happened last year?
Yeah.
And crisis reveals the weakness of the standard systems that have this beautiful idea that you can manage everything with that, but they are not real. They are not concrete. So this is another very interesting conversation that we as HR leaders should bring to the table together with other leaders. And it was good that happened, this disruption, because it will help us to rethink what we have been doing in a provocative way, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
And positively. I'm not saying that everything we have done, we should get rid of everything we have done, but it's time to rethink.
We have a question here from Thomas, and just trying to understand this a little bit. How has the process of corporate strategy development changed, if so, and what does that mean for employees and HR?
I'm not sure I understand the corporate strategy. My perception, if I well understood the question, my perception is that companies are now much more, are listening much more what happened outside the company and outside the market. Mm-hmm. So when you work on a strategy, it's not all about business. It's also understanding what is happening in the social environment, in the technological environment, in a cultural environment. So I see companies now much more open to embrace any other aspect of the life. And so in the definition of the strategy, of the corporate strategy, there is a relevance of think about, for example, all the discussion about diversity, inclusion, or green energy or sustainability. These are things that are not necessarily in the traditional sense part of the business, but are impacting the corporate strategies in some way. Well, that's the only thing that I say.
Well, I think you're spot on. There needs to be harmony now between what the corporate strategy is and what the value system of the employees is as well, right? And where there's a disconnect in that, we've certainly seen vocal platforms of employees talking about or against what the overall strategy of an organization is, right? And they put their hands up and they say, we're against that in some way. So there is more of that relationship between that corporate strategy and the development of it and what the values of the employees are. And if they're out of sync, then obviously you have a workforce potentially that doesn't want to follow leadership and go in that direction. And in a world where we're trying to be employers of choice, that's something that I think is pretty important. Yeah. There's a question here as well, and you just tapped on it a second ago, and we haven't gotten into it today, about diversity and inclusion. And it's a very interesting topic all around the world. It takes different shapes and sizes. Certainly what we've seen with language is that if you think about it, language is inclusionary and therefore exclusionary as well, right? Yeah. Should language and communication be a more strategic or key aspect of DEIB initiatives around the world?
Definitely. And this is not, and this is not only thinking about interactions between different countries. You have now inside the same country areas where there are cultural differences. And this is something I learned, for example, in the States. Living in the States, in Florida, it's a very particular geographical area in the States where you have a melt of different cultures. Mm. So, yeah, definitely, yes, language is a powerful tool.
We've come across programs where companies are struggling to find qualified people in their local market. They had a requirement for language and other things for inclusion in hiring. And what they've done is reduce that requirement in order to be more inclusionary in recruiting efforts, right? And then therefore we'll train people on the other side. That is a DEIB initiative of inclusion, of being able to bring other people from different backgrounds and to really harness the key skills that they have and then work on the others in which they need help. Is that how you see DEIB evolving in time as well, as just different structures and strategies and different approaches to how you define that?
No, I see the same. Yeah, I agree.
Super. I'm just looking for a few other questions here as we have about 2 more minutes. I guess just finally, as we come out of this crisis time, it's really taught us a lot about that shift to crisis soft skills and what that means. How do you think that will continue on post this crisis time of building a resilient workforce, but at the same time understanding that emotional, mental health and the approach towards the well-being of employees is really critical? Will that continue on?
Well, let me say that we really still don't know where it goes. It's like when you know, the big explorers, when they found new continents or new places, they had just a rough idea, but they didn't know exactly what was coming to them. So it's like, it's a similar phase. We know from where we come, we know we have an idea of the direction, but more is going to be discovered. And that's why it's exciting, are exciting times. And that's why you need people passionate for learning and discovering. And if you ask my opinion about the impact it's in the next years, I say the hybrid system. So, well, working from home, but working from office, it's still important for us to have connections and to see our friends, our colleagues. It seems very trivial, but this crisis led us back to the basics, to the basic of our social life.
That's a great way of summarizing it. Back to basics. We're still human. We still need that connection. We still learn from each other. We can inject as much technology and change and everything to it, but ultimately we are social beings and we learn from one another. Thank you very much for wrapping that all up succinctly, Stefano. That was super helpful. And thank you for leading us over the past 45 minutes to understand from your experience what it means for HR to champion change. Change is a constant. We know it's here. But thanks again, Stefano, for being with us today. Thanks to everybody in the audience for joining us as well. Please do join us for further webinars that we'll have within the L&D space of what we do here at EF. And good luck to everybody in the coming months of bringing everybody back together again.
Yep. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.